how's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Erev Yom Revi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Tuesday night? Yehud in South Carolina, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Sharon in New Jersey, Shandor in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Tom in PA, Lorraine in Texas, Lucy in Minnesota, Bill in mid-Missouri, Frank in San Pedro, Marjorie in Georgia, Ella in Southern California, Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. I've been informed that there's an election happening. I pray that we have a positive result and that the best candidate for America wins. That's all we're going to say about that. Tonight's episode, and I imagine that some of us are going to enjoy not paying attention to that and just doing some beautiful learning. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Diana Lazar in loving memory of my husband, Menashe Hessel Ben Meir, who died on June 4th, 2024. Beautiful dedication. Diana, may Menashe Hessel Ben Meir's neshama have a great aliyah, a great elevation in the world of souls. May our learning tonight lift him up even just a little bit higher. We say amen. Thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen. If you'd like to support our annual campaign, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Nina will put the link in the comments. Okay, continuing our journey through chapter 8 and our discussion of Mishna number 6, talking about nuances of laws of inheritance. And can a father bequeath his assets contrary to the expectation, the normal thing in the Torah, divided evenly among all the sons? Firstborn gets a double portion. We've seen that he can certainly, using the language of gift, dispose of his assets however he wishes. And per the opinion, which is the halacha of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, among his heirs, he can distribute the way that he wants, as long as it's people who are fit to inherit from him. So he could, bestow everything on one of the sons. At the end of class yesterday, we had a question from Joseph, who was talking about Yonasan ben Uziel. And I did not have that information on the tip of my tongue, but I looked it up after class. Perfect example to bring up, Joseph. So Yonasan ben Uziel, very interesting, an early sage, a student of Hillel, and there was a man with a wealthy man who lived at that time, who was an admirer of Yonasan ben Uziel, who was so beautiful, learned, sage, wonderful Torah teacher. And this wealthy man, unfortunately, he deemed his own sons unworthy to inherit from him. He didn't want his fortune going to these, rascals, right? To these people that he felt were undeserving. Or perhaps he just wanted his sons to make their own way in the world, and that might be better for him. In any case, he disinherited his own sons and gave all of his fortune, all of his wealth to Yonasan ben Uziel upon his death. So what did Yonasan ben Uziel do? He divided this, presumably out of the blue, massive gift that he received into thirds. He kept a third for himself, per the wishes of the man who gave him this gift. He donated a third of it to the Beis Hamikdash. This is when the temple was still standing. The second temple was standing in Yerushalayim. And 1/3 he gave to the heirs, right? The sons that the father had disinherited, Yonasan ben Uziel gave them 1/3 of what he had received. And Shammai, right, the great sage Shammai, who was a contemporary of Hillel, challenged this, came to Yonasan ben Uziel even though he knew that Yonasan was a student of Hillel, and that presumably Hillel had approved this. But Shammai said to him, why are you giving anything to the heirs of this man? He expressly disinherited them. How can you come back, and even if it's a limited amount, giving them 1/3 of what they would have inherited? Why are you giving them anything if the father didn't want them to have it? And Yonasan ben Uziel said, well, did I receive this gift legitimately? Does this money belong to me? Yes, admitted Shammai. He says, well, then I could do with it whatever I want, and I want to give it to the sons of that man, and that's what he did. And his, both the receiving the inheritance or the gift of that dying man was accepted, and the fact that he gave 1/3 to the actual heirs was accepted and held up. And Yosef asked yesterday, have we come to this story in our journey through the Talmud Bavli? And maybe we'll see it referred to, but my understanding is that story is actually related in the Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, not in the Babylonian Talmud. So I wanted to answer your question at the front. Okay. We picked our daf tonight is page 132 here in chapter 8, continuing discussion of Mishnah number 6. We pick it up at the bottom of page 131b. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If one wrote a document granting all his property to his daughter before his sons, in a case where he has sons who would inherit from him, or he wrote a document granting all his property to his wife before his brothers, or to his wife before the husband's sons who are not her sons, then what is the law? Is it assumed, because we were talking about yesterday, that in certain cases we assume that a gift is more like a lifetime gift, which is then going to pass to the actual heirs, or that this person who's being granted the property is expected to act as a steward, like a guardian of the property, a trustee, as it were, on behalf of, especially if he had minor sons. So do we assume that it was all goes to her, or that she is going to be a trustee for his sons, or these other cases, same idea? So Ravina said in the name of Rava that in all these cases, the recipient did not acquire the property for herself. Rather, he or she was merely appointed a steward, except for the cases of his betrothed wife and his former wife from whom he was divorced, because you would not expect that she would act as a steward for children that didn't exist, or for these sons of another wife. Or in other words, the fact that he gave it to a wife from whom he's divorced, that presumably he already paid off the ketubah, if he's giving it to her, there's no expectation that she'll be acting as a steward, certainly not for his brothers. And therefore, we assume that he meant to give it all to her, and that's what would happen, for whatever his reason was. Now, by contrast, Rav Avira said in the name of Rava that in all these cases, no, the recipient acquired the property, except for the case of his wife before his brothers and his wife before the husband's sons, where he clearly intended only to appoint her as a steward. Now on page 132a. So with regard to the law that a person on his deathbed who wrote a document granting all his property to his wife has appointed her as a steward for his sons, Rava raises a dilemma. And remember that in this patriarchal system, the way it was practiced then, the wife does not inherit from her husband, right? The sons inherit from the husband. And while you could, according to the ruling Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, establish that one son inherits more than others, it's because they all are fit to inherit from the father. But a wife doesn't inherit from her husband in that system, unless he can give it to her. He can decide to do it that way. Of course, he can dispose of his assets how he wants. But per the law of inheritance, it goes to his sons. So if he's saying that she inherits, what he probably means is that she's going to be a steward for his sons. When his sons do inherit, they certainly have an obligation to sustain his wife, even if it's not her mother. Not their mother. Okay, but let's go. So he did this on the deathbed, right? This disposition to the wife. So Rava raises a dilemma. in the case of a healthy person, not the guy on his deathbed, then what is the law? Should it be reasoned that specifically in the case of a person on his deathbed, it is assumed that he intended to appoint his wife as a steward, as it is preferable for him that her word be heard and she is honored after his death? But in the case of a healthy person, he is still standing and can ensure that his wife is honored, so he apparently intended to actually give her all his property. Or perhaps, should it be reasoned that in the case of a healthy person as well, it is preferable that his wife's word be heard and she be given honor from now? So the Gemara suggests, come in here a resolution of the dilemma from a Baraisa. If one writes a document that the profits of his property should go to his wife in the event that he dies or divorces her, right? The profits, so in other words, he has a field, so the value of the produce that's harvested every year would go to her. That's the profits, as opposed to the field itself. So if one writes a document that the profits of his property should go to his wife in the event that he dies or divorces her, she collects payment of her marriage contract, her ketubah, which he wrote her at the time of their marriage from the land itself. The profits are hers as a result of his gift, right? She gets her ketubah payment that he promised to give her at the time that they got married. If he later says, I'm giving you the profits of the land, so that's not payment of the ketubah. That's an additional gift. So from where is the ketubah going to be paid? Now that he's already given her the profits of the land, you can't take the ketubah from that because that's hers. You can't take a ketubah from what's hers, so the ketubah payment has to come from what's still his, or if he dies, from his estate. And what's that? The land from which those profits are taken. The profits are hers as a result of his gift. Similarly, if he wrote a document granting her 1/2, 1/3, or 1/4 of his property, she collects payment of her marriage contract from the rest of his property, which he did not give to her as a separate gift. The gift is hers. He also owes a ketubah payment in case he divorces her or he dies, in which case the estate owes her. So the ketubah payment has to be paid from what is still his, what he has not gifted her. The Baraisa continues, if one wrote a document granting all his property to his wife, so he gifted all the property to the wife. Now, what happens there? All his property, he's now gifted it to her. Is there a ketubah? Yeah, there's a ketubah. From what can the ketubah be paid? From nothing, because he's already given her all the property. So she'd rather have all the property than a right to a ketubah payment, which is much smaller usually than all his property put together. So she'd rather have all his property than the right to receive this ketubah payment. So what they're going to talk about is presumably she waives the right to receive her ketubah payment since she's receiving all his property instead. But here's the problem. If one wrote a document granting all his property to his wife, and subsequently a promissory note emerged against him for a loan that he took while they were married, but before he gave her this gift, then Rabbi Eliezer says that she should tear up her deed of gift and remain with her ketubah so that the creditor will not be able to collect the property she received, as her marriage contract preceded the promissory note. Right? Imagine that this guy, gives her all his property, but all his property is worth nothing because he had a huge loan outstanding that's larger than the property that he left. And this creditor is going to come along and say, I want my money back, and I'll take it from the estate. And the estate, let's say, is not even quite enough to pay back the whole loan. So the fact that she received all that property as a gift means she now loses it because the creditor shows up and takes it. However, her ketubah payment, right, she got the right to that when she got married to her husband who's now dead. So that precedes the loan that this husband took, which now has a lien against all the property in the estate. So she should still have the right to her ketubah payment. And the question is going to be, well, when she received the gift, did she waive her right to that ketubah payment so that now she's stuck with nothing? And so Rabbi Eliezer says, no, she tears up the deed of gift forget the gift. I don't want the gift. The gift is worth nothing since it's for property that's all mortgaged to a loan I'm going to lose it all. But my ketubah preceded that loan, so I don't want the gift. I want to keep my ketubah. And the guy, the creditor, who's going to come along and take this property, he can't take the value of the ketubah payment because her lien precedes his lien, precedes the creditor's lien. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. And the rabbis say, meaning the majority who disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer, she must tear up her marriage contract and remain with her deed of gift, as by accepting the gift of all her husband's property, she waived her right to receive payment of her marriage contract. She probably didn't know at the time he gave her this gift that it was all mortgaged, to this loan. So at that time, what did she do? She would certainly say, yeah, I'd rather have all your property than a right to, 400 shekels. Let's say all his property is worth 1,000 shekels. Yeah, she'd rather have the 1,000 shekels worth of property. So at that point, she's going to waive her ketubah in order to have all the property. And then when the creditor shows up, she can't say, oh, no, I retroactively say I didn't receive that gift. It's too late. And because she waived her ketubah payment, now she's end up with nothing. Right? This is a very sad case, but, the reason it happened is because her husband was, stupid. And he mortgaged all the property that he had, and he left her with nothing. That was the real problem. He borrowed so much money, and there wasn't enough money in his estate, and he didn't protect his wife when he took out such a loan. I shouldn't call him a jerk. Things happen in the world, but it's very sad. He did this to his wife, not the creditor. Now, since the promissory note preceded the deed of gift, the creditor receives the property, and the wife is found to be bald from here and from there. In other words, she ends up with nothing. And Rabbi Yehuda, the baker, said, there was an incident where this matter occurred to my sister's daughter, so his niece, who is my daughter-in-law. Right? So if his niece is his daughter-in-law, sounds like his son married his niece, like cousins marry each other. Sounds like cousins married each other. Maybe they could be cousins who married each other but weren't blood relatives because it was first wives and second wives. I don't know. But at any rate, the point is that this happened. There was an incident where this matter occurred to my sister's daughter, who is my daughter-in-law, that my son wrote such a document to her, and the incident came before the sages, and they said that she must tear up her marriage contract because she waived it, and remain with her deed of gift, and then the deed of gift ended up being worth nothing because the creditors showed up and took all the property, and she was found to be bald from here and bald from there. She ended up with nothing. And the Gemara infers the reason she loses her gift is that a promissory note emerged against the husband's property. But if a promissory note did not emerge against him, then she acquires the gift of his property, meaning, you see, it's like that's the sad case, but that's the more unusual case. What's the more common case is that a husband can gift all his property to his wife, and then his sons won't get anything. That's what's going on there. But if a promissory note did not emerge against him, then she acquires the gift of his property. And with regard to what case is this stated? If we say it is with regard to a person on his deathbed, but didn't you say previously that in such a case he merely rendered her a steward? Rather, is it not with regard to a healthy person? So accordingly, Rava's dilemma is resolved. If a healthy person writes a document granting all his property to his wife, it is hers. Now, the Gemara rejects this proof. Actually, the halacha of the Baraisa is stated with regard to a person who is on his deathbed. Well, didn't you say that on a deathbed, if he gives everything to his wife, what he's really saying is he appointed her to be the steward of the property on behalf of his sons? And Rav Avira would interpret the Baraisa as referring to all of the cases mentioned above, in which, in his opinion, the wife acquires the property and she is not appointed a steward. And Ravina would interpret it specifically in reference to a case where one wrote a document granting all his property to his betrothed wife or his former wife whom he divorced, where he concedes that she acquires the property and is not appointed as a steward on behalf of the man's sons. Now, Rav Yosef Bar Minyumi says that Rav Nachman says the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. She must tear up her marriage contract and remain with her deed of gift, and she is found to be bald from here and from there, and this is because a promissory note emerged against the estate of the man who died. Now the Gemara asks, is this to say that Rav Nachman, right, it's sad for her in those cases, but what it implies is that the deed of gift to the wife works, it operates. The man can disinherit his sons and give all his property to his wife. The Gemara asks, is this to say that Rav Nachman does not follow the principle of assessing intention? Meaning that even if one did not state something explicitly, the court assesses what his intention was and decides the law based on that assessment. Right? In those cases where we assume that the guy in his deathbed was only appointing his wife's steward on behalf of his sons, he didn't say that. He just said, give it all to the wife. In the situation, we have good reason to believe that he didn't want to disinherit his sons. And so what he was saying is that she can be a steward, she can live off the assets, but she's taking care of it, that the sons are eventually going to inherit. We assume that's what the man meant, and that's why we're going to do it that way rather than just give it to her outright. So that means we assess what his intention probably was. And so the Gemara is asking, are we saying that Rav Nachman doesn't hold by that principle? That we don't try to figure out what the man's intention actually was? But isn't it taught in a baraisa? In Tosefta Kesubos 5:9, in a case where a man's son went overseas, and then he heard that his son died, and then he arose and wrote a document granting all his property to others. And then his son came back. So his gift to those other people is nonetheless a valid gift. And Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says his gift is not a valid gift, as had he known that his son was alive, he would not have written a document granting them this property. And Rav Nachman says that the law, the halacha, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. So apparently, Rav Nachman follows the principle of assessing intention. He wouldn't have given his property to some other person or to some charity if he knew that his son was still alive. And so we say, well, that gift that he made was on the condition that his son is dead, even though he didn't state it's on the condition that his son is dead. And the Gemara answers, there in the case of one who writes a document granting all his property to his wife, it is different, as it is beneficial to her that it be publicized that he wrote a document granting her all that property, and she was willing to risk not receiving payment of her marriage contract to gain this benefit. New subject. We learned in a Mishna there, tractate Peah 3:7, if a man writes a document granting his property to his sons, and he wrote a document granting any amount of land to his wife, she has lost her right to receive her marriage contract, her ketubah. And the Gemara questions this, because he wrote a document granting her any amount of land, she has lost her right to receive payment of her marriage contract. Why should this be? So we understand if she was given a gift of all his property, which surely exceeds the value of the marriage contract, okay, she'd rather receive that gift than her marriage contract, so she's assumed to have waived her marriage contract. But why would she be okay with, receiving, a few square cubits in his driveway, which by itself is not worth much? Okay, it's a piece of land, it's her piece of land, but let's say it's worth 100 shekels or 50 shekels, and her marriage contract is 400 shekels. Why would she be deemed to have waived her right to her marriage contract just because she received some land? And Rav says this Mishnah is referring to a case where the husband transfers ownership of his property to his sons through his wife's participation in a formal act of acquisition. Not only did she not protest the transfer of property to the sons, but she facilitated the transaction. So clearly she agreed to waive payment of her marriage contract. Why is she waiving it? Because the whole estate is being disposed of. And she's present and watching as the whole estate is now gifted to his sons. Gifted because the guy's alive. He's not dead right now. So if she participates in that, okay, well then she knows that there's going to be no property left from which she can receive the marriage contract. Though the husband is still alive, so she might be thinking, okay, well, the whole estate's being given away, but he was able to earn enough money to have this estate. Maybe he'll earn some more later and I'll get my marriage contract out of that. But at any rate, she is participating in the process by which all his current property is given away. So she must be waiving her right to the marriage contract, to the ketubah. And Shmuel says it is referring not only to a case where she actually participates in the act of acquisition, but also to a case where he distributes the property to his sons in her presence, and she is silent and does not ask about her marriage contract. And Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says it is referring to a case where he says to her, take this parcel of land for your marriage contract, even though maybe it's worth less than what her marriage contract would have called for. Now we're on page 132b. And the sages taught here one of the leniencies that apply to a ketubah. This manner in which the wife loses her right to receive payment of her ketubah is a leniency for the husband, as an ordinary creditor does not lose money he is owed in this fashion. The Gemara questions this statement. We learn in the same Mishnah that Rabbi Yosei says that if she accepted the distribution upon herself, even if he did not write a document granting her any amount of land, she has lost her right to receive payment of the ketubah. So by inference, it can be stated that the first Tana holds that both his writing a document granting her a piece of land and her acceptance of the distribution are necessary for her to lose her right. This is contrary to the interpretation of all three Amoraim, i.e. Rav, Shmuel, and Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, all of whom assume that she need not affirmatively accept the distribution and that her silence is sufficient. All right? So when do we assume that she's okay with this? Now, why would we ever think that she's okay with this? Well, because maybe, there's only been one husband and one wife, and the sons that are involved are her sons. And she trusts her sons, and she wants them to have this property so that they can manage it. Maybe the father's very sick, he can't look after it. She'd rather that the sons have it and they could look after it. And she's confident that her sons will take care of her, and that's why she might participate in this the way it's being worded. And the question is, well, how explicit does her assent to this gifting of her sons of the father's estate during his lifetime, which waives her, because there won't be any property for her to receive the ketubah from? How explicit does her assent need to be? Is it enough that she's present when all the property gets disposed of? Is it that she has to receive at least some small part for herself? So we can say, yeah, she was part of the process. She received some of it herself. Or does she actually have to say, I assent to this? I am okay with this. And if you would say that the entire Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, who holds that either the husband's writing a deed of gift or the wife's acceptance of the distribution is sufficient, but isn't it taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda said? According to the first Tana, and a Tana is a rabbi of the Mishnaic period, as opposed to an Amora, who's a rabbi of the Gemara period a little later. Rabbi Yehuda said, according to the first Tana, when does she lose her right to receive payment of her marriage contract? In a case where she was there at the time of the distribution and she accepted it. But if she was there but did not accept it, or she accepted it but she wasn't there when the distribution was done, then she has not lost her right to receive payment of her ketubah, as she can claim that her acquiescence was only to please her husband and was not sincere. And the Gemara concludes the refutation of the opinions of all the interpretations of the Amoraim is indeed a conclusive refutation. No, she can't just sit there silently and say, and we can assume that she agreed to it all. No, she has to do more than that. It has to be a more positive acceptance and approval of this distribution. Rava said to Rav Nachman, this is the opinion of Rav. This is the opinion of Shmuel, and this is the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Chanina. What does the master hold in this matter? And Rav Nachman said to him, as I say, that once he rendered her a partner in the property among the sons, she lost her right to receive payment of her marriage contract. But did she, acquiesce actively to becoming a partner in this distribution? Rav Nachman's opinion was also stated as a halachic ruling. Rav Yosef Bar Minyumi says that Rav Nachman says that once he rendered her a partner in the property among the sons, she lost her right to receive payment of her marriage contract. Is that because she received as much property among the sons as her marriage contract would be worth, or only a small amount would be enough? Rava raises a dilemma. In the case of a healthy person, what is the law? Do we say that the wife loses her right to receive payment of her marriage contract only in the case of a person on his deathbed, as she knew that he had no other property, and nevertheless waive payment of her ketubah? But in the case of a healthy person, she might have reasoned that he will then acquire more property from which she will be able to collect the ketubah, and that is why she accepted the distribution of the property. That would be a big difference between the case of a healthy person giving away all his property to his sons and leaving nothing for her ketubah payment, but he can earn more later, versus a man on his deathbed, who if he gives everything to his sons now, there's not going to be any other property for her to collect the ketubah. If so, if she thought that he will earn more later, in the case of a healthy person, she did not waive her right to receive payment of her ketubah. Or perhaps we should reason that since, in any event, right now he has no other property, her acceptance should be interpreted as waiving her right. And the Gemara concludes, the dilemma shall stand unresolved. Teku. Now some incidents. There was a certain man on his deathbed who said to the people surrounding him, give 1/2 of my estate to my daughter, and 1/2 to my other daughter, and 1/3 of the produce to my wife. So in other words, I have 2 fields, give 1 field to my daughter, give the other field to my other daughter, but the produce of the field, that belongs to my wife, or at least 1/3 of it does. Rav Nachman happened to come to Surah, and he entered the study hall to see Rav Chizda, who said to him, in a case like this, what is the law? And Rav Nachman said to him that this is what Shmuel says. Even if he transferred to her ownership only of 1 palm tree for its produce, she has lost her right to receive payment of her marriage contract because she participated in the distribution of the assets. She was aware that they were being distributed. She accepted that. Now that there's no other assets left to pay off her ketubah, it means she waived her right to her ketubah so that her children could get this distribution. Rav Chizda said to him, say that Shmuel said his statement that she loses her right there in a case where he gave her a palm tree for its produce because he transferred rights in the land itself to her ownership, as the palm tree is connected to the ground. And perhaps over the life of the palm tree, it will produce much more than 400 shekels worth of dates. But here, in this case, it is only produce that he gave to her. No real property, just the right to the produce of some property, without any share in the land itself. So perhaps she does not lose payment of her marriage contract. And Rav Nachman said to him, you say that he gave her only movable property, right? The dates from the tree. I certainly did not mean to say that she loses her right even if he gave her only movable property such as produce. Rather, she still has a right to the payment of her ketubah. Right? It's only when she participates in a distribution of the assets that yields to her some actual property, land, that we can say she waives her right to her ketubah payment. But if she just gets a right to some produce, some money, some, movable property of any sort, no, she has not waived her right to the ketubah payment. There was a certain man on his deathbed who said to the people surrounding him, give 1/3 of my property to my daughter, and 1/3 of my property to my other daughter, and 1/3 to my wife. Gift, right? This is the language of gift. And he's on his deathbed when he does it. One of his daughters died before he did. He was on a deathbed, but he didn't die so quick. And sadly, one of his daughters died before he did. So what do we do with her portion? He gave it to her. It was hers, but she died before him. presumably she doesn't have children, nor a husband. So what happens when a daughter has property and she doesn't have children or a husband, but she has a father? In fact, even if she had children or a husband, if she had a husband, it would go to her husband. But in the absence of a husband, if she has property and her father is still alive, it goes back to her father. So since the man on his deathbed ended up outliving his daughter, he gave 1/3 of his property to that daughter. When she died, it went back to the father. So where are we now? One daughter has 1/3 of the property, the wife got 1/3 of the property, and the father received back that 1/3 that he gave to the daughter that died. Rav Papi thought to say that the wife takes only 1/3. She cannot receive payment of her marriage contract from the 2/3 bequeathed to the daughters, as by entering a partnership with the daughters in ownership of the property, she waived payment of her marriage contract. Right? When she participated in the distribution of all the estate, of all the man's property during his lifetime, knowing that now there's no property left, because one of her daughters got 1/3, the other daughter got 1/3, and she got 1/3, she was waiving her right to a ketubah payment because there's nothing to take that ketubah payment from, especially because this guy was on his deathbed. Later, some of that property came back to him unexpectedly because his wife died before he did. So there are assets there for her to take her ketubah payment from, but she already waived that when she participated in this full distribution of his property. Now on page 133a, I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rav Kahana said to him, to Rav Papi, right? That Rav Papi said, yeah, she waived her right to the ketubah because she participated in this full distribution of his assets. Rav Kahana said to him, if the husband had then acquired other property, not received back the 1/3 that he gave to one daughter that predeceased him, but he acquired other property. If the husband had then acquired other property, would she not have taken it as payment of her marriage contract? And since if he would have then acquired other property, she would have taken it as payment of her marriage contract, now she also takes the deceased daughter's share as payment of her marriage contract. We don't assume that she waived it at the time it was distributed. We're saying she waived her right to take a marriage to take her ketubah payment from the property that the husband owned at that time. But she might be thinking, well, he might get lucky and acquire some more property even though he's on his deathbed, and I will take my ketubah payment from that. And that's what ended up happening. I wouldn't call it lucky that his daughter predeceased him, but he also might have just received property from somewhere else. She would have taken her ketubah payment from that. Therefore, she takes her ketubah payment from this property that came back to him. And finally, there was a certain person who divided his property between his wife and his son, and he left out a single palm tree, right? So half the property went to his wife, half the property went to his son, but there was one palm tree that didn't go to either one. He kept that for himself. Ravina thought to say that the wife has only the single palm tree as the source for the future payment of her ketubah, which was presumably left out of the distribution of his assets for this very reason. Rav Yemar said to Ravina, if she does not have the right to collect payment of her marriage contract from all of his property, as she presumably waived that right when he gave her the gift of some of his property, well, then she does not have the right to collect it from the single palm tree either, and it belongs to his heirs. Rav Yemar presents a different ruling. Rather, since the halacha is that she does descend to collect the palm tree, she therefore descends to collect all the property as well, as she receives payment of her ketubah from all the property. I don't understand that. That confused me right at the very end there. I think what they're saying is any other property that the man had, she would collect the ketubah from. So either she's collecting it from that single palm tree, if that's the only property there is, but he left some property so that there was other property in his estate, and he might have, earned or gathered or received more property later, and she would collect the ketubah from that. And what we're saying is she did not waive her right to receive her ketubah payment when she participated in the distribution of his assets, particularly because some of those assets were left out of the distribution in the form of that palm tree, which either could be the source of the ketubah payment or also symbolize the idea that there's this palm tree and whatever other property he gathers after that distribution. That's my understanding. Okay, take a few questions. Bill, we're seeing here again a consistent element of Eliezer's analysis. He always wants to take the interpretation of the law that puts the least burden on the poor, in this case, the widow. Right, and just as we saw in the whole oven of Achnai story, he was moved by the plight of the poor who now had, through this technology of an oven made of concentric clay rings, but was not a clay vessel, that if a sheretz, a dead creeping thing fell into it, it would not be rendered tameh, causing the especially a poor person to have to replace his whole oven because it was no longer usable. So he appreciated that technology, right? And what's beautiful about that is that Rabbi Eliezer, who's very concerned about the poor, came from a wealthy family. So yes, beautiful observation, Bill. Jonathan, I wonder, given that the law of the land is the law, Dina de Malchusa Dina, do we assume that, in my case, California, state law would override halacha for inheritance and also divorce, we're a 50-50 community property state, for adjudication? I think we covered this in Gittin, but I don't remember at the moment. Right, so great question. And this is why, if you're writing a will and you're concerned about this, they're not going to come along, a rabbi's not going to come along and override a probate court, right? So, and that is an example of where Dina de Malchusa Dina. Somebody who is, both a law-abiding citizen and a Torah-observant Jew will want to, make sure that his assets are disposed of in a way that is kosher by Torah law and adheres to the law, to state law, in whatever jurisdiction he's in. You're not going to say that, well, I didn't agree that my assets should be distributed, between, child 1, child 2, child 3, and the U.S. government and the state government that are going to take these huge chunks of taxes. But that is what's going to happen. There's going to be some kind of inheritance tax, depending on what bracket you're in, etc. So they have to function together. And yes, we accept that the law of the land is the law. But a lot of this is where we're operating in that area where the person didn't specify, right? Or he wasn't clear in what he was trying to do. So there we have a situation where, in the absence of a will or in the absence of a clear will, the Torah law and the sages and, halachas that they've been determined by our sages and, gathered the force of halacha over time might come with a different outcome than a probate court in the absence of that same kind of clearly written, wishes of the deceased of what should happen to his assets. Now that's a tough situation, but the probate court probably will have the jurisdiction. So all the more reason why, consult with your rabbi and consult with a good estate lawyer when you're drawing this up and be as clear as possible. Joseph, making sure I understand the language of gift versus inheritance is distinguished by further context in the will and different places these words are used. How is this not just playing semantics? Well, listen, everything in the law is going to be language dependent. That's just the nature of contracts and wills, last will and testament, etc. But there is a big difference between gift and inheritance. And by the way, that's not just in Torah law. In estate law also, if you're saying that somebody's going to inherit, okay, so that's going to be through the vehicle, the legal device of inheritance. And you might say in a will that at the time of my death, I gift or I give as a gift. I've seen language like that in wills, okay, under California law. Now, why is that important? Especially because what you've said is, especially when you're creating like a family trust or a living trust, then you're saying I'm putting all the assets in the trust, and as of now, I am gifting these assets to so and so, and that gift is going to vest, right? It's actually going to get carried out at the time of my death, but then that asset has already been removed from the estate and won't pass down to inheritors. And that's why gift and inheritance are not just semantics. They are invoking different principles, and that's why there are different outcomes. And finally, Sharon, is there a presumption that all the parties are aware about waiving of what is perceived as the wife's sustenance from her ketubah? Does she know of all her husband's assets? Right, that's a wonderful question. How does she know? Especially in that system then, like he's doing business, he's handling the money. How does she know what's really going on with his assets? It could really happen as this awful surprise. That he said, hey, honey, yeah, we're going to do this. It's good for you. It's good for the kids. Just here, officially speaking, you're going to get this. They're going to get that. And then later, it turns out it was not good at all. Bad outcome. But when we're saying that she has waived her ketubah payment, that's not waiving her sustenance. That's a different right that she has. Her ketubah payment is that if the guy dies or if he divorces her, he owes her a flat sum, right? Whatever they agreed on, either minimum stipulated by the sages or some much greater amount. There's also a dowry payment. That she always has a right to that. Sustenance is something else, right? Just in addition to her ketubah payment, she has a right to sustenance. And there's definitely more nuances and ins and outs than that. But nonetheless, I mean, it could always happen that somebody gets left in a really tough spot. And we hope that the husband took care of the wife. We hope that the Beis Din would, do what it needed to do to make sure somebody wasn't going to become a beggar after, having been provided for and having provided for her husband for many years. Please God, it didn't turn out, that she was put out on the street. But, as in all things, be careful, right? Be careful. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.